2. This is the meeting of the Rhode Island Coastal Resources Management Council. I will call it to order. But ask that the record reflect staff members and council members that are present. Tonight is a continued date for the application 2021-07-005 Revolution Wind. Matter was previously heard before this council and continued to today's date. Couple preliminary matters. The minutes from our last meeting have been prepared and disseminated. I would entertain a motion to accept the minutes as presented. Motion made and seconded. Well, is there a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye. Anyone opposed? That motion carries. Subcommittee reports, Mr. Willis.
There are no subcommittee reports, Mr. Chair.
Staff reports, Mr. Willis.
Similarly, there are no staff reports tonight. I'm sorry.
We will then reopen the hearing on the application. And I would ask Mr. Willis if you could bring us up to date on what's transpired since the last meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the last meeting, we discussed the merits of the application, and with one general outstanding issue was the mitigation matter that had to be addressed. And what I just want to say before I ask the chair to turn it over to the FAB representative and the applicant's representative is that staff worked with both parties to come and address the mitigation matter in a holistic way, meeting regularly, as you'll see in my memo that we distributed to you earlier today and that you have copies of in front of you, where we worked very hard to address all the outstanding mitigatory measures to come to a resolution and an agreement that's in front of you tonight. So I just want to thank staff for your hard work. I want to thank the applicant for their hard work. I want to thank the FAB for their hard work, especially the subject matter experts and legal counsels for both. It was a very long, arduous process, but it was very professional. It was well attended. It was very amicable and agreeable, and we worked through some very hard issues to come to this agreement, which, as you'll see in my memo, on top of the agreement, staff is recommending that the MOU be approved as part of any CRMC decision tonight. So I just wanted to lead off with that, and with that, ask the chair if you want to turn it over to the two parties for further explanation.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask counsel for the FAB to come forward and just share an update as it relates to the proposed MOU. I will then ask Attorney Main on behalf of the applicant to share her comments as it relates to the proposed MOU.
Good evening. Where would you like me to stand?
Wherever, we're not videotape, or are we?
Right here?
Good right there. Thank you.
Hi. Good evening, everyone. My name is Marissa Desitil. I represent the Rhode Island Fishermen's Advisory Board. Thanks for having me. I agree with the representations that I assume both the applicant and CRMC staff might share with you tonight in terms of the contents of the MOU and the mitigation package agreement that we were able to reach. Since everyone is now operating under the principles of something called a memorandum of understanding, the FAB feels very confident in relying upon that document in order to move forward tonight and request that the council approve the terms of the mitigation package as proposed. The FAB, likewise, as Mr. Willis just said, really appreciates the level of cooperation and good faith put forward through the terms of this mitigation process. We also appreciated, my client also appreciated the process employed by all of the parties in this matter. We were able to reach what we think is a very reasonable agreement, working with not only CRMC and Orsted, but with the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management. The parties collectively and consistently met with each other on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, depending on the topic, to arrive at the mitigation package outlined in the MOU. Members of the FAB and the FAB's subject matter expert agreed that the solutions proposed by the MOU reflect proper scientific procedure and methodology. The FAB is grateful to DEM staff for their assistance with technical issues and solutions. Collecting sufficient data and information is always a good path forward, especially where there is so much uncertainty. Ørsted has provided drafts of the necessary documents to establish the Revolution Wind Viability Trust and the Community Fund, which will hold the mitigation funding itself. Those documents are currently undergoing review and edits. The FAB also received a draft engagement letter from the technical assistance provider who will assist in the administration of the fund. Those documents and terms are being reviewed as well. While each project is different, and must be evaluated on its own merits, the FAB is hopeful that all future mitigation processes and compensation negotiation will include the steps formulated throughout this matter. Todd Gilfus, Todd Gilfus, who is standing behind me, is the FAB's subject matter expert. He is available for questions regarding any technical issues associated with the mitigation package. And of course, I'm available for any legal questions that you might have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Attorney Main, if you'd like to address us on that issue.
Sure. I too would like to echo the thanks that Marissa just extended. I want to give a big thanks to Executive Director Jeff Willis, Mr. Skenyon, Mr. Chiacchetto, and Mr. Sloan. These gentlemen gave up more Thursday nights than I think they care to count in helping us through the mitigation negotiations, and that was invaluable with their guidance, time, and energy. And the Revolution Wind team also wants to thank Marissa, Dr. Gilfus, and the FAB members for working with us in good faith and cooperatively to get to this memorandum of understanding. Marissa, Dr. Gilfus, and the FAB were solution-oriented and working with us and RIDEM, Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management, including on topics like the cable effect study, which I'll speak to you about in a moment. And I also, as Marissa did, and I know I'm being a little bit repetitive, but it's important because we really do want to give a shout out and a thanks to all involved, including the folks at the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management. In particular, they're great professionals in the Division of Marine Fisheries. Those folks and their expertise were showcased during our baseline discussions with the FAB's representatives and Woods Hole, as well as recently and right up through, the final minutes of the workday this past Friday on the cable effect study. So we really appreciate RIDEM's input here as well. Now, if the chair would like, I can go through a high-level outline of the memorandum, or because it's already before you, we can dispense with that.
I would ask counsel, do you have a preference on that? We have been supplied it. Any questions, or would you like Mr. Gomez?
I've reviewed it. There might be a few comments that I've got, but I don't think we need to. I think it's pretty complete. The document we have. One question that I would have, just as procedural, is there an official MOU yet, and has it been signed by all parties? That would be a normal thing, wouldn't it? That's the MOUs I'm used to. Maybe coming from a university to the
Absolutely.
Navy would have signatures on it by the appropriate powers to be.
I would, but the MOU that you have, you're correct, but the MOU you have before you has some contingencies in it, one of which is approval by the council of the application. I'm assuming that if the motion is to approve and that motion is carries, that then the MOU will be executed and perhaps appended to the decision. Am I correct in that assumption?
So Attorney DeSisto, because the FAB is advisory to CRMC, it's not a separate legal entity to sign the MOU. So I envisioned it as just part of the assent or an exhibit to the assent.
Yeah, but
Correct, but you're gonna sign.
Certainly Revolution Wind can sign it if you would like.
and the appropriate person on this side would be
Jeff.
And as you indicated, the FAB is advisory, but the signatures would be CRMC and Revolutionary Wind.
Sure.
And I think that's the correct way to go. It's whatever, I'm not alone though.
That's all, you have a question?
No, I just, I was
Well-
asking about a preference. I think just because this is so recently agreed to, in the interest of transparency as a public agency, I think a brief high-level review for the record would be prudent and advised. That would just be my request or suggestion.
That's fine.
Sure, I'd be
Please.
happy to do that. And please stop me if anyone has any questions. And Marissa, please interrupt me if you think I've gone astray. So the payments under the MOU are as follows. There'll be payments of $3,050,000 for direct compensation. I'm going to put an asterisk by that and return to it in a moment because there's some adjustment that may be made there. $200,000 will go into a community fund, which is being set up as a nonprofit to handle grant requests and disperse money as grants to. And again, Revolution Wind doesn't want to be involved in the particulars, but the overall very general mission is to support fishing and the industry in Rhode Island and fishing related activities, coastal activities. Another $200,000 is also being put into the trust for trust operation. So that technical assistance provider that Attorney Desautels made reference to a few minutes ago, that money could be used for paying that technical assistance provider and other uses that the board of the trust find are appropriate. So that total package comes to $3,450,000. Attorney Desautels and I just mentioned the trust, and what has been drafted and we are working out the finer details is the Rhode Island Fishermen's Future Viability Trust number 3. So there's one for Vineyard Wind, there'll be one for South Fork, which was before the council last year, and then number 3 is for Revolution Wind. And that trust, among other things, will establish a claims process to manage and process compensation claims that are made as a result of Revolution Wind. And it will also have a component for the community fund that I just talked about, which is the grant making fund. That trust will have, as again, Marissa and I have talked about already, a third-party administrator to help with dealing with the claims. And again, that trust will have a board. We made some suggestions about the board itself. Certainly the FAB has its requests on that as well. And that seems to be in agreement between the FAB and Revolution Wind. Again, I want to emphasize though, Revolution Wind will have no involvement whatsoever in the trust or the community fund. Once the money's put in, then that is turned over to the board of that trust. Another aspect of this MOU, and this is why I put the asterisk on the direct compensation amount, is that the FAB made an excellent point about schedule. You know, we're on a hard schedule because of our windows to work, because of our contractor and the milestones that we have to achieve under the power purchase agreements. So, you know, we're saying we're going to get this cable installed in the months of October and November to meet all the criteria that I just mentioned. But FAB said, what if you miss that? And so what we agreed to do is back out approximately $513,000 from the overall direct compensation number, divide it by the 60 days or so that we estimate will be cable construction, and get to a per diem of, and I'm rounding up, $8,410 per day. So that amount will accumulate during the construction timeframe. If we go over the 60 days in cable installation, then we'll have to pay additional money. And if we get it done, in 56 days, we'll get a credit of 4 times the 8410. So this per diem is for actual cable installation. But it also includes if the ship, which is likely the Aurora, Gareth Ellis may have made mention of that ship's name during his testimony. If the Aurora is sitting out there in the cable corridor, but maybe it's not on that day disturbing the seabed, that day will still count. That's still an active day because the Aurora is sitting there in the cable corridor. But what it won't include are miscellaneous other activities before October and after November. You know, if it's a survey or something along those lines with the seabed. So it's actually when the cable lay vessel is out there in the cable corridor itself. And then very quickly, Revolution Wind and the FAB have agreed to sit down and talk about the gear loss program. Orsted's had one in process for a couple of years now. The FAB has made some comments about it, and we want to sit down and talk about simplification and improvements to it. And Revolution Wind is also agreeing to pay compensation to fishermen for the time it takes them to file a claim. So that's also part of the MOU. And then one other major substantive point. We presented before you experts on November 22nd on EMF. And there's been a lot of talk about the effects of the cable. Revolution Wind's position is there'll be no effects from the cable once, you know, the project goes into commercial operation. Nothing will affect the fisheries. But the FAB has commented, you know, what if? And so with the great help of RIDEM, Dr. Gilfos, Woods Hole, and Spire, we put together the outline of a cable effect study. The details of that study are in your MOU. But if the study, after going through various tiers of analysis and also an independent third-party verification, finds that there has been an effect, payment will be made into the trust. And to conclude on this as to timing, like when will these payments be made? The overall payments will be made 30 days after Revolution Wind receives all its final permits, approvals, and so forth. The only caveat to that is that construction schedule per diem that will be assessed and then paid once a certain time elapses during the construction schedule. So I don't know if I've hit everything, Marissa.
Okay. Any questions of council members of either of the councils? Attorney Desatel or Attorney Main? Again,
Just one minor clarification, I'd just like to, RIDEM in here should be Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management. I don't think we were identified within the MOU, although we're identified in the cover sheet. Just want to clarify.
So you need to spell out the acronym.
Yes.
Yes, sure.
as well.
This probably is a question more for the staff relative to this. Back to the discussion about this being part of an assent. So the desire or the outcome desired is that this be incorporated as the assent. Is that the idea that I heard you explaining?
Our staff's recommendation is that this would be part of the decision. If the council chooses to approve the application, it would be basically an exhibit on the decision.
Okay, so based on that, what are the accountability measures to the council relative to the operation of the MOUs? So for example, the operation of the trust, disbursements, the study survey, the data analysis, the commitments that are being made in this document are then very similar to assent conditions. So what are the accountability measures in place for the council to see to the accountability of this agreement in addition to whatever permit conditions ensue?
May I answer that? The accountability wouldn't be from the council, rather it would be staff.
Right, but what's the accountability to, in other words, the information flow from the parties to the staff would be significant. Is that apparatus set up for that type of accountability?
That's a question better for Jeff than myself.
That's why I asked Jeff.
It is. I mean, staff has established a relationship with both the applicant and the FAB to monitor the activities of these wind farms. And so we are very much involved in the forthcoming Vineyard Wind construction, the forthcoming Southport, and we will be with Revolution. So in terms of asset conditions, we will be questioning the applicant and making sure that they are met. And if they're not, then it's our responsibility to bring that information to you all as an enforcement matter.
Thank you.
Great.
Yes, Mrs. Gomez.
Just on that, Jeff, you'll have a project manager, I assume, and all of that would funnel from him or her to you on the Revolutionary Wind. Are you the project manager?
I'm ultimately the project manager on
Understand.
every asset that goes out of the agency. But
Understand that, but
most, it would, if I would look to my staff and we would, we had one particular staff draft the staff report with all of us involved in that as well. And we would look to that person to be a de facto.
so the
project manager.
discussions on anything that should come up as a result of this would be on a level here, and you would be one of maybe two people that sits
Correct.
here and work that out with your counterpart at Revolutionary.
Absolutely.
Is that the way it would work?
It is the way it works. We've had several very intensive enforcement matters that we ultimately might have brought to the council, but tried to work it out at the staff level, and we're successful in working out the staff.
Yeah,
level.
good.
And if we can't, then we bring it up
Yeah,
here.
but there is a point of contact within your
Absolutely.
organization.
Right.
Which has a counterpart with Revolutionary Wind.
Correct.
And anything that they can't agree on basically comes through you and your counterpart.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay.
Any further questions?
I have a follow-up question.
Mrs. Izzi?
The ultimate document results from the memorandum of understanding. Is that going to be an independent contract between and Revolution? Or is the only enforcement mechanism really by CRC staff?
It will not be a separate contract, and it will be through the Ascent and CRMC's enforcement powers.
If I could just add to that,
Okay.
that agreed. The FAB will also enter into a separate agreement with the accounting firm that's going to be managing the trust funds. So that won't be anything that the CRMC needs to be concerned with. We'll handle that through the trust itself.
Just to comment on that procedure was established previously, wasn't it, relative to similar issues on the Block Island wind farm or other offshore, the whole deal with the trust and how that operates and how FAB interfaces with that. I think
Yes, I believe
this is, you're using the same procedure that's been established.
Very similar to the Vineyard Wind
Right,
setup,
right.
a little different, but with input from Attorney Main and her associate. We have been.
So
working on
we're
all of
not
those
inventing the wheel, we're
not
maybe moving it out a little bit. Thank you.
Any further questions of the two attorneys? Okay, at this point, I'm going to open up public comment as it relates to the application. So I would ask anyone that wishes to be heard. Let's do this way. Before I pull you up, how many people wish to be heard? Just raise your hand or get a count. Okay. I will start with the gentleman in the front row here. If you could come forward, identify yourself, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Patrick Crowley. I'm the Secretary Treasurer of the Rhode Island AFL-CIO,
Useful.
and co-chair
I'm
of
sorry, the
the
Rhode Island one.
AFL-CIO.
Excuse me, sir. We have to swear you in for the
Oh,
record.
okay.
Sir, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
So help you God? Could you please state and spell your name for the record?
Patrick Crowley, Patrick Crowley. I'm the Secretary Treasurer of the Rhode Island AFL-CIO. On behalf of the 80,000 working women and men of the state of Rhode Island that are part of the labor movement, we're here in support of the petition tonight. We think that part of our goal of meeting the African climate is this approval will be a crucial part of that. Last year, the union members across the state worked very hard to pass the 100% renewable energy standard that will be in effect in 2033. And it's projects like this that will help the state meet those goals. So on behalf of all of our members and our affiliated local unions, we're here to voice our support for the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of Mr. Crowley by the council? Thank you, sir. Yeah, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna go by row. So anyone else in the front row? Second row, I see the woman. You, yeah.
Ma'am, would you please raise your right hand? You swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Would you please state and spell your name for the record?
I'm Priscilla De La Cruz, Priscilla, last name De La Cruz, DE space LA space CRUZ. And I am the Senior Director of Government Affairs at the Audubon Society of Rhode Island. And today I am here to also express support for the Revolution Wind project, not only on behalf of the Audubon Society of Rhode Island and our 17,000 supporters and members. I also wear a few different hats through the Environment Council of Rhode Island. That is a network organization of about 60 environmental organizations in the state, as well as individuals, representing well over 56,000 Rhode Islanders. And we're also very active through the New England for Offshore Wind Coalition. And I also work with Pat Crowley as co-chair of the Climate Jobs Rhode Island Coalition. So I will not be repetitive. So everything that Patrick Crowley stated in terms of meeting our Act on Climate goals, as we all know, offshore wind is essential for this transition to a clean energy economy. And we need projects like offshore wind to meet our Act on Climate goals, in particular, our interim targets of reducing greenhouse gas emissions 45% by 2030. And there are already concerns about whether we would be able to hit that target. So a project like Revolution Wind becomes even more imperative. And of course, in my role as Audubon Society of Rhode Island and the work that we've been doing for 125 years to protect birds, wildlife, and their habitats through conservation, education, and advocacy, which brings me here today, we recognize how imperative this is to doing our part in addressing the climate change crisis, and that we have a long way to go to meet what the science is telling us. And in terms of considering environmental and economic impacts, we are pretty confident, as we've seen in the Block Island offshore wind project and with the work of the CRMC through the Ocean SAMP and this council, that Revolution Wind will do the same in building a project that we're all proud of. And hand in hand in looking at how do we mitigate and avoid any of the environmental impacts, but also weighing that with the important economic benefits that we will get as well. So with that said, we are in full support of the Revolution Wind project, and we urge you to approve the permit. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of Ms. De La Cruz from the council? Thank you much. Anyone else in that same row? Third row, gentleman raising his hand. Come on. It can work smoothly this way.
Good evening, sir. Would you please raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Would you please state and spell your name for the record?
My name is David Monty, M-O-N-T-I.
Thank you.
Can you please come closer?
Sure.
Great, have that chair. Perfect. There we go. Thank you.
My name is Dave Monty. I'm a charter captain, and I keep my vessel right in Wickford, which is right in the West Passage. And I keep it in Wickford because it's close to the West Passage, and I fish there regularly during the summer season. I'm a board member of the American Saltwater Guides Association of the Rhode Island Saltwater Anglers. I'm vice president of the Rhode Island Marine Fisheries Council, and a member of the Narragansett Bay Estuary Steering Committee, as well as the Rhode Island Party and Charter Boat Association. I'm a fishing writer for the Providence Journal and 13 other publications, all about fishing all the time, where the bite is, but I also write about climate and its impact on fish and fishing. The fish I catch today as a charter captain are vastly different in type and abundance than the fish I caught 10 years ago. The fishing industry needs renewable energy to help stem the tide on climate change impacts. And this was very obvious during the URI Graduate School of Oceanography Baird Symposium this year. And the topic was climate impacts on recreational fishing and boating. And one after another, anglers and charter captains testified how they were being impacted by climate, and the species that they were catching were vastly different. The scientists pretty much commented as to why the fishermen were seeing that. One of those scientists was John Heer, who is NOAA's chief science officer. We need the Revolution Wind Farm and this cable run to maintain and to help stem the tide on climate impacts. However, should we allow it to be built without doing everything in our power to protect the fish and habitat? No is the answer. We need all the safeguards and research to make sure the cable run is having no unexpected impacts on fish and habitat. Anglers are concerned about fish and habitat rebounding after disturbances created by submarine cable installation, and they are concerned about the research and monitoring plan to make sure submarine cables stay buried and do no harm. Cables are not new for the West Passage. I fish there often and know every ledge, nook and cranny, every cable crossing. There are a number of them. In fact, we have a major one right at Scarborough Beach, as you know, at Narragansett, which is the Block Island Wind Farm cable running in. And you should know that fishing in that area for striped bass, tautog in the Boulder Field at Scarborough, and this year, just an incredible giant bluefin tuna bite right where those cables are in land. In fact, one September day, September 18th on a Sunday, I believe it was 26 giant bluefin tuna, 500, 600, 800-pound fish caught 2 miles off Scarborough Beach, right where the cable run is. This is highly unusual and it has something to do with climate change. The Baker Thief's fish were in close. They were caught off Newport as well. The science we have at the Block Island Wind Farm via the 7-year trawl survey conducted before, during, and after construction showed that there were no negative impacts on fish abundance, as you know. In fact, there was greater abundance in in the Block Island Wind Farm area and black sea bass. This enhanced abundance occurred right where all the cables were laid. And the study had trawls going right over those cables. And this dovetails the findings of European wind farms where fish abundant in wind farms outside. I was pleased to see the mitigation and safeguards and CRMC staff report, particularly the recommended stipulation. And I certainly reviewed them carefully. The stipulations including cable burial work, construction schedule, time and restrictions on that to avoid peak fishing times, the cable burial plan. Today we heard a whole bunch of mitigation things as well, which were music to my ears. Boulder Field relocation, and all of the staff recommendations are good ones, and I fully endorse them. Moving forward, I believe CRMC should approve the cable installation plan with all the stipulated measures that the staff noted, and certainly the MOU as well. I believe there will be no long-term impacts on fishing and habitat if this project is built responsibly as outlined. I believe there will be no negative impacts on recreational fishing. And I thank the council and the staff for its fine work. And I thank you for the opportunity to make these comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Monte. Any questions of Mr. Monte? Mr.
Not
Gomez?
not a question, and I hope it's appropriate, but I just want to say, well done.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else wishes to speak? So in the back corner on the left. That's it. Right?
Sir, do you, sir, tell the truth, the whole truth, or nothing, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Would you please state your name and spell it for the record?
Gary, G-A-R-Y-S. Or D-O-R-F-M-A-N.
Please.
My name is Gary Dorfman, and I've been blessed to be a year-round resident on the Saunderstown coast of West Passage, about a third of a mile north from the URI Graduate School of Oceanography since 1985. First, I'd like to thank members of the staff and council for this opportunity to provide testimony. And I'd like to acknowledge and thank the staff of Revolution Wind and Worsted for investing time in email exchanges and 3 virtual meetings, the latest of which took place on this past Friday, December 9th, for the purpose of addressing, at least in part, several of the issues that I will include in my comments this evening. Third, I want to be very clear. I am generally not opposed to the use of federal, state, and local lands and coastal waters for commercial purposes. In fact, I believe that such commercial use of natural resources held in the public trust should be strongly encouraged and widely implemented, provided specific conditions are met. Therefore, the purpose of my testimony today is not to object to this proposal. Instead, I seek several very specific accommodations within the implementation plan for this project so as to eliminate or mitigate potential adverse impacts to people who would otherwise be personally impacted by this project. My concerns regarding potential adverse impacts on users of the state's waters and upon coastline residents along West Passage are in part informed by several past and ongoing activities within the West Passage, including, by way of example only, number 1, the fish processing factory ships that have used West Passage anchorage in past years. Number 2, the ongoing construction of the new dock facilities at the URI GSO. Number 3, marine traffic related to the construction of the Deepwater Wind Block Island Wind Farm, which utilized West Passage. And 4, the survey activities for this Revolution Wind project that occurred over this past summer. Detail those slightly. The first, the fish processing factory ships were obtrusively noisy day and night for prolonged periods of time, to the extent that there were numerous well-documented inquiries and complaints made to local municipalities and to state agencies, but to no immediate avail. Second, URI GSO dock construction also generates loud noise levels well in excess of the applicable municipality noise ordinance levels. However, with only 3 or 4 exceptions, the loud noises associated with pile driving are restricted to Monday through Friday between 8:30 a.m. and 4 p.m. and occur on the minority of workdays. Third, some of the tugs, barges, and workboats used to transport personnel, materials, and wind turbine sub-assemblies to the Deepwater Wind Block Island Farm were relatively quiet and unobtrusive. However, some of the tugs, at least one of them, and workboats were extremely loud, producing noises well in excess of applicable municipality noise ordinance levels. And these loud tugs and workboats often plied the waters of West Passage in the pre-dawn, early morning hours, and late into the evening, really throughout the night. And one of the tug subcontractors generated sufficient noise-related complaints that the Deepwater Wind Project leadership had to terminate the subcontract, I was informed this past Friday. Finally, the motor vessel Sheila Bordelane had been within West Passage both days and nights on many weeks during the summer. Interestingly, when I tried to find out which vessel was responsible for shining bright lights into my home to the extent that my wife and I could do hand puppets on the wall, throughout the night on many occasions, the marine traffic app on my phone correctly identified the name of the vessel, but stated it was a supply ship en route to provide materials to the Long Cove Marina and Campground located within the Great Salt Pond, which is obviously not correct. During one of my meetings with representatives of Revolution Wind, it happened to include a PowerPoint presentation with a photo of the vessel. That's how I learned what its activities were and who was managing the vessel. Of course, no one yet has explained to me or my neighbors why the surveying this past summer had to be performed during nighttime hours rather than being restricted to daylight hours. And furthermore, why bright floodlights shining onto the coast were a necessary part of the survey process. While I'm absolutely certain that there was no malicious intent related to any of these adverse impacts that I've outlined, I'm equally certain that without specific requirements from the council to mitigate similar adverse impacts during the implementation of this project, such completely avoidable impacts might yet occur again. Therefore, I am requesting consideration from the council to make stipulations in addition to those in the current document to eliminate or mitigate such preventable adverse impacts as follows. The applicant has made number one, the applicant has made a compelling case that the actual work of laying the two submarine power export cables necessitates continuous operation and must occur in an uninterrupted manner using the 24/7 work schedule during the approximate 1 month time period when this work is scheduled to occur. Therefore, I request that during that activity that will occur day and night, both weekdays and weekends, that the applicant be required to generate the least amount of noise possible and that the noise level shall not exceed the municipal noise ordinance levels at the property boundary lines of the receiving land use along the shoreline. Also, the applicant should be required to ensure that the ambient light associated with this activity must be aimed so as to avoid impacting the coastal properties to the extent possible. During the recent December 9th virtual meeting among Revolution Wind personnel and me, information was freely provided that indicates that these ambient light and sound requirements should be easily achievable based on the anticipated on-deck noise levels of less than 85 dB weighted as measured at 1 meter and application of the inverse square rule for sound attenuation over distance. In fact, the sound attenuation calculator shows that even if the sound is 10 times louder at 95 dB and the distance was 2,000 feet instead of the 3,200 feet as shown on the map, it still only comes to 38.5 dB at the coastline, which is well below anything that would bother anyone. Therefore, this requested stipulation should not present any hardship to the applicant, I presume. Number two, furthermore, I request that the applicant should be required to adhere to the same ambient light and noise requirements for all the other activities related to this project, including, but not limited to, cable surveying, cable maintenance and repair, and the transport of materials and personnel related to this project through state waters. Again, based on the data provided, this should be easily achievable with no adverse impact to the applicant. Number three, unlike the cable laying process, there is no similarly compelling case for the other activities associated with this proposal to take place using a 24/7 work schedule. The tasks of moving boulders, making grapnel runs, surveying, laying mattresses, and transporting personnel, materials, and wind turbine subassemblies do not need to be continuous activities. Therefore, I request that there should be a stipulation that all activities other than the actual laying of the two submarine power export cables should occur only during weekdays and during reasonable daytime hours of operation, as could be mutually negotiated between CRMC and the applicant. Number four, the applicant has agreed to limit the activities inherent in laying the two cables to the season of August 31 through January 31 of 2 consecutive years. The applicant's expert witness presented data justifying that there are no significant competing uses of the waters during this proposed, along the proposed route during this agreed upon work period. However, I'd like to point out that there are such competing uses, especially during the months of September and October, and especially on weekends. By way of only 2 examples, for about a century, the Connecticut Yacht Club has held its annual Round the Island Regatta and Race on the Sunday or Labor Day weekend, which is usually in September. Similarly, the Saunderstown Yacht Club holds weekend small boat races around buoys placed in the West Passage south of the bridge, but north of URI GSO Hills. Depending on weather, these races may extend into September. As well, depending on weather, there is still quite a bit of recreational boating activity that takes place in West Passage during September and October, especially on weekends. Therefore, I request that there should be a stipulation that the applicant will consider such pre-existing uses of the right-of-way waters and will not interfere with such pre-existing uses and/or will be required to coordinate its activities with the other users. Specifically, I request that weekend Revolution Wind activities during September and October should either be eliminated or minimized to the extent possible without in any way damaging the project. Number 5, the application itself and the council's review state that there will be routine surveys of the 2 submarine power export cables to occur within 90 days of completion and again at 1 year, 2 years, and periodically thereafter. These are the routine surveys. In addition, there will be 4 cause surveys of the cables defined as surveys performed after 1 in 10-year storm events. Given the increasing severity and frequency of such storms and the extended duration of the season during which such storms occur, there should be better definition as to when and how both routine and for-cause surveys will be performed. I request that the applicant should be required to perform both routine and for-cause surveys only during weekdays and during reasonable daytime hours of operation as mutually negotiated between CRMC and the applicant. And that routine surveys should be performed during the same August 31 to January 31, as has already been agreed upon for laying the 2 cables, with the previous requirements that I suggest also be agreed. Number 5, there is an implication that the surveys may reveal issues that demand remediation efforts. There is no detailed plan provided as to when and how such remediation efforts will take place, other than application will be made. There are also proposed periodic routine cable maintenance activities beginning in year 8, according to the copy. Presuming that the council stipulates that routine surveys must take place between the same window, August 31 and January 31, with the caveats already described, I request that the remediation efforts secondary to routine surveys and routine maintenance should also take place during that same window going forward. Furthermore, such remediation efforts should be performed during weekdays and during reasonable daytime hours as mutually agreed. 7, since the 4 cause surveys will take place immediately after severe storm events and not on a predictable routine schedule, I request that to the extent possible, such 4 cause surveys and remediation efforts secondary to those surveys also take place during weekends and during reasonable daytime hours of operation as negotiated. Additionally, since the 4 cause surveys and the associated remediation efforts might occur outside the window of August 31 and January 31, and potentially even during the high summer months, I request that there should be a stipulation that the applicant must coordinate its activities with the other commercial and recreational users of the state's waters, and that a plan for doing so be included in material provided to the public for informational purposes. Number 8, finally, I know finally, you're all thinking finally, while regulation of the marine traffic associated with the transportation of personnel, materials, and wind turbines assemblies to the Revolution Wind Farm site itself is not formally within the purview of this meeting, I respectfully request that the council consider that the same stipulations I've requested above also be applied to such marine traffic, including the stipulations restricting such marine traffic to specific times of the year, days of the week, and hours of the day, and including the stipulations regarding ambient noise and light. This would avoid a repetition of the adverse impacts that occurred during the construction of the Deepwater Wind Block Island Wind Farm, for example. If regulation of this type of marine traffic falls outside the jurisdiction of the CRMC and should rightfully go to some other agency, I would appreciate it greatly if my comments could be referred to that agency, or that the council provide direction to me for the submission of my comments to the relevant agency. In the poem Mending Wall by Robert Frost, the author states, quote, "Good fences make good neighbors," close quote. While the poet expresses regret that fences are even necessary, he does admit that fences do indeed have merit. Of course, the poet isn't really referring only to actual fences. Instead, the point made is that setting parameters for responsible and respectful interactions between and among neighbors make for strong, durable, and positive relationships. My presumption is that Revolution Wind, the residents of Rhode Island, and the state's regulatory agencies would benefit from being good neighbors for one another, setting clear, responsible, and mutually respectful expectations at the outset will go a long way toward that end and will serve all parties' interests equitably. I again would like to thank the council for this opportunity to make these comments.
Thank you, sir. Any questions of Mr. Dorfman from council members?
I just,
Mr. Gomez.
some comments if I could. I'm glad to hear that you're not objecting. But a number of these I think are addressed. The noise legal limits is really subject to a town ordinance. And typically those have to be addressed by taking a measurement at the position that the complaint is coming from. If the noise is too much at your house, the town has the means of coming out, measuring the decibels and determining whether they are within limits or not. Each case will be different depending on atmospheric conditions and other things such as rain and storm and things like that, just a general atmosphere. I don't know if your town has a light ordinance, but that's a very similar thing. The CRMC can't be responsible for noise at your location that doesn't exceed the town limits. So the town needs to be involved on both of those. Relative to yacht club races, that was discussed, I think, at our first meeting, where we went through what times of year they would be. And a lot of that wasn't in the West Passage, as I remember. It was more offshore, not in the channel that we're talking about. The other surveys and things I think have been, and transportation of personnel, I think have been pretty well worked out. I would suggest that what you have said should be in the form of a memo or letter to CRMC included in the package. It may be too late to do that legally. I don't know, but you made some good points, and I think they ought to be put in as part of the package.
May I address a couple of things?
Absolutely.
So first of all, as I understand it, my testimony does become part of
Yeah,
the record. It is, but I'm happy to submit.
No, it will be, you're correct. It would be
In
part of
terms of the noise
minutes.
for the tug that was part of the Deepwater Wind project, I happen to have a small non-commercial personal recording studio in my home. And because of that, I have a dB meter. And I can tell you that the tug was in excess of 80 dB A-weighted in my bedroom and in my kitchen with the sliders only minimally open.
Okay.
It was over 75 dB with the slider closed. So that was measured. The problem is it's difficult to have the town deal with that when it occurs at 3 in the morning, or 11 at night. By the time we get there, the tug has gone by. And so the noise is, it's done, if you will. I understand that it's a municipality level, and that's why I was suggesting that that would be what would be stipulated, that the receiving land use noise levels should not be above the municipality level. If that's not within CRMC's purview, then I certainly can deal with that through the town. But again, in my discussion with the Revolution Wind folks, they were very forthright, provided to me documentation what their intent would be in terms of noise level. And again, using scientific sound attenuation formulas, it would fall significantly below the town ordinance levels. So I'm just requesting that a stipulation be made that they be held to their intent.
One of the things that I will note is that the Block Island Wind Farm had an awful lot of lessons learned, and I think I've seen them reflected in the proposals. And I do appreciate your comments and
in terms of the sailboat racing, you're right, the expert witness largely discussed major offshore events, but the Connecticut Yacht Club round the island race, the island in question is Jamestown Island, not Block Island. So they go around Jamestown Island and hence use the West Passage. And as I said, that occurred the Sunday of Labor Day weekend. And the Saunderstown Yacht Club races are within West Passage, and those I don't believe were addressed by the expert witness. So I just bring those up for informational purposes only.
well, thank you for your input, and I certainly paid attention to them, and
Sure.
we'll consider all you've said, and you're right, the stenographer will have the comments that you made, and they will be part of the program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any further public comment? Okay, we'll close public comment. Attorney Main, I'll offer you an opportunity to wrap up your case as well as maybe address anything that was said during public comment, if you decide to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, on behalf of the Revolution Wind team, I would like to extend our sincere thanks to the council for your time and attention over these 3 meetings. And again, I, on behalf of the team, would like to thank Executive Director Willis, Mr. Skenyon, Mr. Chiacchetto, Mr. Sloan, and many others, Lisa Turner, for answering our questions along the lines. We really do appreciate the time and attention that the staff always takes and the responsiveness of the staff when we do have a question or request a meeting. And getting through a project that's as complicated as this is, it's excellent to have people at CRMC with the expertise and with the patience to work with the applicant through these types of processes. Now, I would like to talk briefly about the relief that we seek here. And what I hope this meeting concludes in is in a vote to approve the Revolution Wind project under this category B application, which means the installation of the export cables and certain onshore work in the Quonset Point area. This will take Revolution Wind one step closer to bringing renewable energy and the industry that it brings as well to the state of Rhode Island. And we believe that through our written application, the supplemental materials that we have provided, and the testimony that we have given over the past several hearings, that Revolution Wind shows that it complies with the relevant regulations under both the Red Book and the applicable portions of the Ocean Special Area Management Plan, or OSIM. We have also sought relief from this council in 3 areas, essentially. First, we requested a variance, and the variance was in regard to the amount of baseline material that the project would collect. And as a brief reminder on that, my partner Christine described how the project meets the 6 requirements of a variance. And the variance is to section 11.9.9 of the OSIM. This section requires the project to collect 2 years of baseline biological assessment of commercial and recreational targeted fisheries before construction. As you heard during the testimony, Revolution Wind expects to collect 1.5 to 1 3/4 year of baseline data through the survey in collaboration with the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management. And actually, RIDEM's analysis of what's going to happen with this survey shows that the survey will collect significantly more samples than the minimum required to detect population changes. And that's one of the key requirements and purposes of this baseline. And in addition, as we pointed out during the testimony from Kyle Cassidy of Orsted, Revolution Wind, and this is allowed under that OSAM provision I cited, and rely on many years of data that RIDEM has already collected in that area as part of this survey. So with the thoroughness of the sampling that's anticipated, with the years of data that's already been collected, we believe that there will be no issue in meeting the spirit and requirements truly of the OSAM here, and we have met the variance issues. It's a very narrow variance that we seek here. So that's one area of relief. And the other area of relief is the special exception and the, again, awkward phraseology, rebutting the presumption under the OSAM about having the export cables in the recreational area of particular concern, or for short APC. And again, here recreational refers to things like sailboat races. And Ross Pearsall from Orsted testified about the races. And again, that was under the OSAM. So you're in Rhode Island Sound, and those are the races that he spoke about. And with that special exception, rebuttable presumption, we put forward evidence that we can meet the requirements of the special exception and use that same evidence to rebut the presumption that we will not have a negative effect or use conflict in that recreational APC just outside of Narragansett Bay, and it covers the East Passage and the West Passage, where our cables will be installed below the seafloor. That area is only about 10% of the overall recreational APC, and the work in that area, again, in the Sound, will be outside the high boating season, again, as testified to by our Orsted representative. So for those reasons, we meet the special exception criteria, as again, we set forth at the hearing on November 22nd. And we also are able to rebut the presumption against being in that APC. We also sought relief in one other area. Before I get to that, I want to say that the Revolution Wind team agrees with all the staff stipulations. The staff report is excellent, and we agree with all the stipulations except for one. And that's the third area of relief that we sought, and that is whether the General Assembly has to approve a lease or license of this project. And I noted that in the Rhode Island general laws, specifically section 4623(2), we believe that the General Assembly has delegated sole and exclusive authority for the leasing of submerged and filled lands and the giving of licenses for that land directly to the CRMC. Now, in the event that the council disagrees with us on the interpretation of that portion of the statute, I respectfully request that the council vote to recommend positively to the General Assembly to approve the lease and or license for this project. So those are the three areas in which we sought relief. We otherwise believe that we meet all the requirements under the Red Book and applicable provisions of the OSAM. And we respectfully ask from the council tonight that you vote in favor of the special exception for the project, including that we have rebutted the presumption about being in the recreational APC, that you also vote in favor of the application, including the variance that we set forth. That you vote in favor of the mitigation proposal that Marissa Desutel and I outlined earlier to you. And again, that you decide on the lease or license issue before the General Assembly and consider if you do not agree with our interpretation of the statute, that you recommend to the General Assembly that they approve a lease or license of the project. So again, on behalf of the Revolution Wind team, I would like to thank you for your time, for your attention, and respectfully request that you approve the Category B application, and again, the relief that we've requested that's before you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. That will conclude the evidence coming forth this evening as the council. I would ask if the council is in a posture to make any motions as it relates to the application and parts of the application. And it looks like the first thing that we will address is the special exception. Anyone have a motion as it relates to the special exception?
Mr. Chairman, based on the staff report and recommendations, the testimony presented by witnesses, the exhibits that were introduced, and the public comment that we heard in the deliberations of the CRC Council, I move to approve the special exception as requested by Revolutionary Wind, subject to the recommendations and stipulations of the CRC staff.
Mr. Izzy, that's just in relation to the special exception?
Correct.
Mr. Chair, I'll move that, but I think any stipulation should be, I think we need, can I ask legal counsel a question?
Yes.
So Mark, I think we need three separate motions if we were to approve this application. Special exception, the variance, and the application itself.
That's correct.
Okay, so I think when we refer to any stipulations, I think that should be considered when voting on the application. So I think if Mr. Izzy withdraws that, I'll second his
If
motion.
there are no stipulations that the staff has for the special exception, then I'll withdraw that portion of my motion.
And I second the motion.
All right, motion been made and seconded. Any discussion amongst the council? Hearing none, I will now poll the council. Mr. Izzy,
Aye.
Ms. Hall,
Aye.
Mr. Gagnon,
Aye.
Mr. Gomez,
Aye.
Ms. McGovern,
Aye.
Mr. Sahajian.
Aye.
I too, Raymond Hoyer, vote aye as it relates to approval of the special exception. Next vote will pertain to the application itself.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
variance.
Variance, I think would be second.
doing it separate as opposed to the application, and included in the application is the variance.
Correct.
So we'll do a separate one on the variance.
So, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Based on the findings of fact and the staff reports together with testimony before the council, I move approval of the variance
Mr. Sajan, if I may, does that include the contents of the?
and the contents of the application itself.
Second,
Motion made by Mr. Sahajian, seconded by Mr. Gomez. Any discussion amongst the council? If not, I'll now poll the council. Mr. Izzy,
Aye.
Ms. Hall,
Aye.
Mr. Gagnon,
Aye.
Mr. Gomez,
aye,
Ms. McGovern,
Aye.
Mr. Sahajian.
Aye.
I too, Raymond Coyer, vote aye on approval of the variance. Next before us will be the application itself.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Sahajian.
Once again, based on the findings of fact in the staff report, based on the testimony before the council, based on the fact that the MOU will be incorporated into this application, and based on the entire contents of the application, I move approval of the application with all staff stipulations except stipulation number 3. I think that we have the flexibility, and the General Assembly has passed enabling legislation, giving the applicant the authority to move forward with our General Assembly approval on the lease.
second.
Second.
Go ahead.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Sahajian, seconded by Ms. McGovern.
Did I capture everything that we needed to capture?
Yes, you did. And so just to be clear, that's without the stipulation regarding submerged land leases.
Correct.
As advised by the staff.
Correct.
All right. As indicated, a motion has been made by Mr. Sahajian, seconded by Ms. McGovern. Any discussion?
So a question on that one, does that stop CRMC from going to the General Assembly and asking about the land lease or requesting direction or approval from the General Assembly regarding the land lease? The submerged land lease. And I like the recommendation that CRMC recommends that the land lease be approved or give CRMC the authority to approve it. That was discussed earlier.
So, Mr. Gagnon, I believe that would be in contrast to Mr. Sahajian's motion.
Yeah, so I'm just asking.
So the way that staff reads and legal counsel's view is that the provision in 4623(1) states that the legislature hereby declares that any lease of title lands or any lease to use such land shall be subject to approval, disapproval, or conditional approval by the direct enactment of the General Assembly by legislative action thereon. Now, I omitted the middle part of that statute, which talks about in light of the unique size and scope of the overall potential impact upon the environment of large-scale filling projects involving 25 acres or more. So the legal counsel's position on that statute is that it allows the General Assembly to step in on any lease of title lands, which would in this case be one such lease. The provision regarding that states in light of the unique size and scope of the overall potential impact upon the environment, and that specifically talks about the 25 acres of filled land, is more of a, it provides color to what the General Assembly is declaring. With that, I think there's a consideration about the size of the disturbance that the current project will have. So the question is whether to recommend to General Assembly or not, based on both staff and legal counsel's review of that statute. Does that clarify for you?
Not quite.
Okay.
Sorry.
If you could please rephrase your question.
So I guess I just want to make sure the council or CRMC staff at least has the opportunity to make sure they're comfortable in making a decision that we have authority to approve it without any input from the legislature regarding submerged land lease issue. That last meeting, it was, I think, staff's opinion that they should go to the general. It was staff's opinion at the last meeting that the submerged land lease issue should at least go to the General Assembly.
That's correct.
So I just want to finding a way to make sure that the CRMC staff still has an opportunity to go to the General Assembly and I guess hopefully make sure that they are not violating any of the laws of the General Assembly regarding the land lease, original land lease.
It would be certainly the CRMC could make a recommendation to the General Assembly in this regard, and the General Assembly could take it up on their own accord sua sponte.
So basically, the General Assembly could always overrule what this condition is part of the assent. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, they could take the lease itself and they could approve, disapprove, or approve conditionally based on the size of this project, if they so choose.
Could I just confirm with staff that that's acceptable in terms of going forward with this?
To offer an opinion on there's a motion in play.
Yeah.
And my understanding is that the motion would be for all the staff stipulations except what we're recommending for our position on pushing it to the legislature. And that only position, the only position there is on the submerged lands fee being set by the legislature. Not any other ability of the legislature to look at it. The CRMC is making the ability on the merits of the application. Our position as staff is that the fee is being set by the legislature per the intent of the legislation.
Any further discussion? A motion has been made by Mr. Haitian, seconded by Ms. McGovern. I'll now poll the council. Mr. Izzy,
Aye.
Ms. Hall,
Aye.
Mr. Gagnon,
Aye.
Mr. Gomez,
Aye.
Ms. McGovern,
Aye.
Mr. Sahistian.
Aye.
I too, Raymond Coyer, vote aye. I think that covers everything, am I correct?
I believe it is, Mr. Chair.
All right. Votes are all in the affirmative on the three motions. And I don't think we have anything else before us this evening. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Motion made, is there a second? Motion made and second, all in favor, say aye. Aye, anyone opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.